A little limited on time. I really appreciate all the questions, and certainly in this, if there's any questions, y'all just holler them out, and just keep me on time. And Trent, when it gets time to go, just holler for at the end. I am Dwayne Beatty. I was with the University of Arkansas system for 20 so years, and then was with Pioneer for nearly 8 years. And then this year was my first year as a crop consultant, and it was I really enjoyed this year, although there was some ifs, ands, and buts about it. So which way is front, backwards, and
There.
well, I guess we'll stay on one slide for the whole time.
Let me see.
There you go. You turn the slides for me.
It's changing on the computer, but not on the projector.
But one thing that it's amazing how data correlates together, and I hadn't seen any of Trent's data, although I've heard him speak many times. And you know, one of the things that we've seen over the years, and certainly as Trent mentioned, the university recommendations years ago was pretty heavy pre-plant fertilizer and then following up. And one of the things is that with the way corn grows and as fast as it can grow, then it can get ahead of us in meeting nitrogen requirements. So that's one of the tools that we can utilize in keeping up with this crop is heat units. And you'll see the name many different ways, growing degree units, heat units, or growing degree days, but they're all the same. And this was no new idea. It was 300 years ago, a French scientist saw a correlation between air temperature and growth stages. And then that was followed up by several others. We won't get into that. There's a formula for it, and it's the minimum temperature plus maximum temperature divided by 2 minus a base temperature, which with corn, the base temperature is 50 degrees, and then the maximum threshold temperature is 86. And you see the other crops, rice very similar, sorghum similar base temperature, 100 degree threshold temperature, and that'll play effect in some of the growth of the crop. One thing that is noted for sure on this 86 degree threshold temperature is photosynthesis shuts down around that 86 degree temperature mark. And we'll notice that in the crops. One of the important factors is that temperature range between day and between high and low temperatures. Crops thrive when there's at least a 10 or 15 degree, and I'll say even a little bit higher degree range in there. So if we're in 90 degree days, we can still maintain optimum growth if we cool down to 65 degrees at night. Now, you know, in South Arkansas, that seldom happens, but that is one of the things that works well for crop growth. Now, one of the things this bell curve shows it pretty plainly in the minimum temperature range of 50 where there's little if any growth, and then once you reach above 86 degrees, that growth slows down significantly and even declines. And there's many times when we get in the dead of summer and we're running 100 degree days and 80 degree nights, and that corn crop just doesn't advance like it does in milder temperatures. There's several management decisions that we can make utilizing heat units. Pest management, weed control, insects, nitrogen timing, and that's what we'll focus on, but and even grain dry down, and that's one of the things I used this year to help growers determine when they'll be able to harvest a corn crop, because it works pretty good, but again, you've got to there are some factors, and one of the main things that is important with using heat units for growth staging is you've got to ground truth it. You know, certainly one of the best ways to ground truth heat units with corn is when you see the tassel or the silking, then it's easy to correlate that. But many times that's too late if you're making management decisions. So, as early in the field as you can, if you see a new leaf, second, third leaf, whatever it is on corn, if you can say that was a new leaf, then you can correlate your heat units to that. In rice, the DD50 program is an excellent tool to help with management decisions, and one of the things that I like about it is it tells you some herbicide cutoffs when you don't need to be applying phenoxy herbicides and all, and that's correlated to crop growth. And on the insects, we won't cover that really, but there are insects that have the same temperature base and thresholds, and there's even work that shows the management practices for insects. Now, I don't do it, but that is a tool possibly. And we'll talk about this grain dry down later with if we have time, but it correlates pretty good in the early when corn reaches physiological maturity. There will be for every 30 heat units, it'll remove a point of moisture, and when you get down to 25%, then it takes a few more heat units, and then we all know at 18% moisture, corn just hangs there for, it seems like, forever. And then there's many factors that impact these heat unit accumulations: tillage, planting depth, planting date, as Trent was mentioned, or was mentioned earlier, the planting date, moisture, if it's too wet or too dry. But that all is pretty much in the soil temperatures determine some of that. And then once that corn gets above, that growing point gets above soil level at V6, roughly V6, that's when the solar radiation and the air temperature really come into play. But all of that, there are many apps, many websites that help track growing degree days, and it's just a factor of loading the app. And one of the things, some of these apps will actually forecast the heat units for you, so you can make management decisions based on what the 30-year average of temperatures are and where you'll be. One of the things that I like and used it this year for the first time was a spreadsheet that Kevin Lawson and Jason Kelly, the corn specialist in Arkansas, gave me. And it's just a simple Excel spreadsheet. You plug the heat unit formula into it, and then it'll calculate your heat units. And then on this one, to keep a running total, I just plugged in a formula to when it got down to the end of April. Then I carried it up to May and kept it running so that for whatever particular date, middle of May, I could see what the total heat units were and help to better manage decisions based off where that running total was. But there's several ways to do this. And certainly with corn, we all know from a lot of the work that was done by the authors that mentioned at the introduction of this, that it's a very determined growth stage. At V2, it's roughly 200 heat units. And then as you see on down where we hit that silking or R1, roughly 1,400 heat units. And then at physiological maturity, we're at that 2,700 heat units. And now, that is going to be, each corn hybrid is going to be pretty specific for the heat units, whether it's 111-day corn or 120-day corn. So just be sure and look at the recommendations from the hybrid and make sure it matches up with where you're wanting to time your applications. And this again is a slide that Trent used, but it just shows us very definitely, as he said, there's very little nitrogen used early in that corn plant's life. And then when we get to that V6, V8, V10 growth stage, there's where you see that growth spurt that we come into with corn. And that's where so many times, if we're not on our toes, and with the amount of acres that growers are operating in now, it's very easy for corn to get away from them and not be able to be timely with the fertilizer. And that's one of the aspects of these management decisions. And a good friend of mine, and very good friend of Bill Lambert's, picking on you there, Bill, Brewer Blessed made the comment, the worst place to store nitrogen is in the soil. And that's very true with what we've seen in the last few years through some of the N15 work that Trent and others have done in being able to show us how much nitrogen we're getting into the corn plant at each of these timings. And it all goes back to efficiency, being efficiency in the management. And you know, it's been said many times that in the old days that nitrogen was more of an art than a science. And we said the same thing about cotton defoliation years ago, that defoliating a cotton crop was more of an art than a science. But you know, in one of the first corn production handbooks that I saw, everything was based off of days after emergence. You know, you'd be in that V3 range and V3 growth stage, and you'd be 8 to 10 days, and you'd get into the R1 growth stage, and you'd be 54 to 62 day range there. And then one of our growers this year was putting out his nitrogen, timing it by the heat unit accumulation, and that's one of the things we want to look at. And at this meeting last year, Mr. Bruce Bond was at the, just talking to a couple of people. It was Dan Poston and Brewer Blessed, and I happened to walk up about the time they were talking about fertilization, and Mr. Bruce had said, you know, I'm on some very leachable sandy ground in Portland, Arkansas, cotton ground that I've started growing some corn on. And you know, typically when I plant, we always get a big rain, and we lose that nitrogen, that pre-plant nitrogen. So one of the things that they had mentioned was, well, if you can get timely, and of course Mr. Bruce, he doesn't farm a lot of acres, so he is timely. So he said, don't put any nitrogen pre-plant, but come back at V2, or that 200 to 300 heat units with 80 pounds of nitrogen, and then time it at that 600 to 750 heat units with 110 pounds, and then follow it up with a pre-tassel. So the pre-tassel amount is already figured into the total nitrogen. And that's one of the keys that we'll work off of, is if we time or figure our total nitrogen and include a three-way split with the pre-tassel, then I feel like that's insurance. We're not putting all of our fertilizer out, we're spreading it out. So that's one of the things that Mr. Bruce said he was going to work on and do. And this was actual rig that Mr. Bruce come up with. He does a lot of liquid fertilizer. He can get over it with the knife rig in his two-leaf corn. But then in this mid-season, he retrofitted a high cycle sprayer. And I don't know if you can see these tubes here, but they're old hydraulic hoses actually is what he put on there, and just hung them down where they're dragging in the row middle. And he's putting out a 28005 mixture, and that's what he used to run it. And as you see here, at 200 heat units, he put out the 80 pounds of nitrogen. He come back in this growth stage was the 600 to 700 units that he hit with 110 pounds of nitrogen. And he did use Agritane in these surface, even though it's a liquid nitrogen, he's dragging that nitrogen along the row middle and letting the nitrogen on the ground. So he put Agritane with it. And then he come back with his 50 pounds at pre-tassel. Now, he used the same high cycle at the pre-tassel application, but what he saw was it bent the corn over a little bit, so he's going to have to figure out a way to get his boom up higher. But he really liked the way this worked. He said, matter of fact, he did it on his cotton too, using the high cycle and putting out his liquid nitrogen in his cotton also. So it's a factor that worked well for him, or he liked it. Although one of the problems was he had a custom operator come in and harvest his corn crop, and thought everything was fine on the yield monitor, but when he tried to get the yield data, he didn't have any yield data. So you know how it goes with technology. But so again, he was real pleased with the way the system worked and the timing with the heat units. And you see, this wasn't his field, but just say a similar field. Here he was at his 200 to 300 heat units, and he had about a 5 to 6 day window there that he could get that out. And then a couple of weeks later, he was in that 600 to 700 heat unit window, and was able to get that out. And then in this pre-tassel, which that's a pretty short window to get it out, but most people call an airplane and put the pre-tassel out. So, you know, that's something that can get out pretty quickly, although Mr. Bruce did it with the high cycle. But that just goes to show, and this is some work that Brewer Blissett did, and again, it correlates so well with some of the previous data we saw. He had a total of 220 pounds of nitrogen, had 100 pounds at planting and 120 pounds side dress. He had good efficiency and saw a respectable yield. Where he went with just a 120 pound side dress, you know, like Trent brought out, his nitrogen was limiting. And so we saw a reduction in yield, although he must have had some pretty decent residual nitrogen in that crop also. But then where he had timed zero pre-plant nitrogen and then followed it up with a 120 pound side dress, and then come in with 80 pounds pre-tassel with a 200 pound total nitrogen, he still got respectable yields that was very comparable to the pre-plant and side dress. So again, it just shows the efficiency that is needed, and this is some work also that he showed, just the higher nitrogen, the better response he got with yield. But again, the key point there is you've got to be sure that P&K is not limiting also in that regard, because I worked with a grower a few years ago that he started out saying, my budget only allows me to put out so much P&K, and we just looked at his soil samples and he needed significantly more P&K than what he could put out. So we finally decided on a P&K mix, and then we come in, I said, well, I started to say, since you're only putting out so much P&K, let's not put out as much nitrogen. And before I said anything, he said, oh, but I want to put out plenty of nitrogen. Well, you can't do that. You've got to correlate that with your base fertility. Trent, how are we doing on time? Do I need to, is it?
I mean, it's probably getting close to lunch.
Okay, well, let's just go ahead and do any questions, y'all. I know we went through that fairly quick, but I did want to show the way Mr. Bruce had put this out with using liquid nitrogen with a high cycle. Saved the airplane cost, although, you know, I'm not against, when it gets time to get nitrogen out, I'd much rather call a plane and get it out timely and efficiently if it comes into the situation where you're not able to. Any questions? Y'all have any questions on that? All right, well, thank you. Appreciate your time.